DNS-based DDoS attacks are a menace. How do you mitigate them using FortiDDoS appliances from Fortinet? Hi, my name is Hemant Jain. I am VP of Product Engineering within the FortiDDoS group at Fortinet. I'll be discussing these attacks and the mitigation techniques using FortiDDoS appliances in this presentation. So let me introduce you to the DNS resolution process first. So let's say a host at example.com wants IP address of www.target.com, and that's where DNS comes into picture. So this requesting host has a setup where it knows where to go next for DNS resolution, and that's set up in its own configuration. So when it goes there, it makes a recursive query. That local DNS server in turn goes to the root DNS server. That root DNS server points it back to the top level domain server for a specific type of domain, like .com in this case. This top level DNS server comes back saying that for target.com, the authoritative server is at a specific IP address. So then the local DNS server makes once again a query for www.target.com, and this comes back with the IP address of that specific server, which in turn is given back recursively to the requesting host. So each of these infrastructural components, including the web server, are prone to attacks, DDoS attacks, including DNS DDoS attacks. And we'll be talking about examples of these DNS attacks in the next few slides. So the first example is asymmetric DDoS attack, amplification attack. In this case, using very few bytes of query, a very large response can be generated. For example, if you send all or any type of DNS query, the response, depending on the server's configuration, could be very large. So there is a large amplification factor, and that uh, fills up the pipes. The purpose of these attacks is to fill up the network pipes because the packet sizes are abnormally large. The packets per second may be less. So the attack target could be the DNS resolver itself, or through reflection, you could create a very large attack on some other site. The next attack is called reflection attack, and we alluded to it in the previous slide. And in this case, the attacker sends spoof DNS queries to an open resolver, which responds back to the spoofed IP. Now, the spoofed IP, which is the target of the attack, gets this response back, which it never queried for. Now, when you have thousands of these spoofed queries coming uh, from different IPs, this server gets overloaded with responses. Now, in this case, the packets per second are a lot, the packet sizes may be regular, and the target in this case is the CPU or memory of the attack target. The next type of attack is called the DNS tunneling, And in this, actually, the attack is not on DNS, but it exploits the open firewall for DNS for doing something else which is not DNS. So it could be to camouflage or bypass firewalls and tunnel other protocols uh, which may be encrypted, so no one in the infrastructure in between realizes what's going on, and data could be stolen via DNS. So uh, this is an anomalous use of DNS for non-DNS purposes. The next attack is called the non-existent domain attack. In this case, a resolver or an authoritative name server is, is queried with a lot of non-existent domains. So for example, if you're serving example.com, then the queries would be a.example.com, b.example.com, c.example.com, 1.example.com, and so on. Totally non-existent domains. And the name server is essentially overloaded with queries which it doesn't know how to respond. And it's waste of its resources. And the purpose of this attack, therefore, is to overload the server. The next attack is called the phantom domain attack, and one more attack called the random subdomain attack. The phantom domain attack, in this case, the attacker sets up a bunch of phantom domain authoritative name servers which either respond to the request slowly or not at all. And a compromised client basically keeps making queries to this uh, to, to, to this domain, and therefore your own internal DNS resolver gets overloaded with queries for which it is not getting any responses. In case of random subdomain attack, the queries keep uh, varying with time with totally non-existent subdomains. So it's very similar to the NXDomain attack, but it could be scripted. And therefore, we need a lot of countermeasures. So let's understand the DNS Vulnerability Foundation. Basically, DNS was not designed to be secure. It was designed for robustness and reliability. And that is the weakness which is exploited by hackers. Now, what FortiDDoS does by intercepting the queries and responses is it adds new checks and balances that ensures that unnecessary traffic is never forwarded to the DNS servers. It either drops the bad traffic or asks the client to prove itself or send responses from its own cache to the extent it can when it is under heavy attack. And that too only during the floods. Only legitimate traffic that passes all tests is essentially forwarded to the server. Now, DNS is a prime target, and we make it very difficult for attackers to reach the server as we filter the attack traffic in FortiDDoS appliances. So that's the basic foundation of our solution. So in terms of a simple deployment, FortiDDoS sits at the gateway, at the perimeter of your infrastructure, which may include DNS servers. And you may have subsequent appliances such as FortiGate, FortiWeb, FortiADC, and so on. And for a more complex deployment for communication service providers, uh, you could use a lot of features in FortiDDoS, which essentially allows FortiDDoS to limit queries only to the CSP subscriber, or use FortiGuard's domain reputation services for filtering queries to domains that are unwanted. So it, in a way, it blocks spread of viruses and worms and botnet attacks. So let's understand the countermeasures for DDoS attack mitigation in FortiDDoS. The first thing it has is network transport and application layer, essentially layer 3, layer 4, and layer 7 anomaly prevention. And this feature allows blocking of scripted attacks which are badly written and do not follow the protocol syntaxes. Next, it can block rate anomalies, and that's done using behavioral anomaly detection. Any rate which is much higher than what you have seen in the past is, is checked and ensured that it follows the previous rates that you have seen, and anything more than that is blocked. And then you have network transport and application layer ACLs, which are very high performance ACLs, and they can be used to block unwanted traffic in a network. So let's say you do not host a DNS server, then you can simply block all port 53 traffic to your web server or your e-commerce server and so on. And then you have anti-spoofing, which is done for TCP through SYN flood prevention, and in case of DNS, we do it using for UDP by enforcing TCP protocol, and it's done at a very high rate. And then we have geolocation based access control list. So you can say my customers can only come from my country and these neighboring countries and not far from some other continent and so on. And then we have IP reputation services which come from FortiGuard. And then you can also enforce BCP 38 policies. State anomaly prevention is another way to have clean traffic. And that's enforced at TCP layer so that packets which are out of state, foreign packets and so on, are not passed through. And then we have application layer heuristics such as slow attacks and so on, which are blocked at layer 7. And then a very powerful feature called source tracking allows you to identify sources which are misbehaving and block them for a longer duration. That was, in general, DDoS attack mitigation. But then there are specific countermeasures for DNS related attacks, including tunneling, amplification, and NXDomain, phantom, random subdomain queries, etc. So the first thing, very similar to the other protocol anomaly detection, we also look at many DNS related protocol anomalies. And if they are found, the packets are simply dropped. Then we look at the DNS rate anomalies, and these are extremely useful for amplification and reflection attacks, where we see traffic much more than what you had seen earlier, and therefore it can be put to many more further tests to ensure that only legitimate clients go through and not the attack packets. And then there are DNS ACLs, including distress ACLs, which are very powerful for blocking amplification and reflection attacks. Then you have DNS anti-spoofing, which is extremely powerful feature. DNS is primarily UDP based, but the anti-spoofing feature in the protocol allows the appliance to force the clients to use TCP, and that via that proving that they actually are non-spoofed IPs. And then we have some patented features. One of them is called TTL check. Now, TTL is, is time to live. And when a client or a stub resolver makes a query and gets a response, it is supposed to cache that response for certain number of minutes or hours or days, depending on what the configuration at the DNS server is. And within that duration of the TTL, it is not supposed to query again. So we maintain a table of client IPs and what they have queried and when did they get the response. And if they query again, which shows a misbehavior, that IP or that packet is blocked and that IP is flagged. And this is very useful for scripted attacks or botnet attacks where the client is continuously querying the same IP, continuously queries for the same response. The next patented feature is called the DNS query response matching. And in this case, what we do is when a query comes to us, the FortiDDoS uh, stores that query with a signature, and then when a response goes back, it knows that a response has been sent. So therefore, it has a way to figure out if uh, if a client is making duplicate queries while the response is yet to come, or for blocking unsolicited responses for which we have never seen a query. So this feature allows us to block duplicate queries as well as unsolicited responses. The next feature is called the DNS legitimate query table. And in this LQ table, when under normal circumstances we see a positive response going for a query, we store that so we know which domains are being served by the DNS server under protection. So when FortiDDoS is under, it sees a flood of queries coming in during a flood, then it has the ability to figure out if these are random subdomain or phantom or NXDomain queries, which the FortiDDoS appliance doesn't have in its own LQ table. So it's a great way to filter queries under attack and therefore not allow them any further and simply drop them while the legitimate queries go through because we have a copy of them in our appliance. And the last feature, and extremely powerful, is the DNS cache. And if all goes well and all checks are met so far, and we see a query for which we have stored a response earlier during the normal times, we can serve that response right from our own cache without overloading the actual DNS server. And these features basically make FortiDDoS one of the best appliances for DNS-based DDoS attack mitigation. Now, in addition, FortiDDoS for CSPs has another feature called restrict DNS queries only to to the CSP's own subscribers. So that ensures that even if they have a open resolver, the IP addresses to which that resolver serves is enforced through FortiDDoS. So no IPs from outside the subscribers can query that server. So it's a great way to block attacks on the open resolver of the CSP. And additionally, if a client within the subscriber's base makes a DNS query for a suspect domain due to botnet infection, that suspect domain, if it exists on our domain reputation services suspect list, it would simply be dropped. So that's another great way to block spreading of uh, unwanted attacks outbound from the CSP's network. In addition, the administrator of FortiDDoS can add a list of domains that they don't want to be served, and those queries from their subscribers would not be responded, and they would not be able to reach uh, those sites via the domain name resolution. So these are great features for CSPs, and that's what makes it extremely these features make the appliance extremely powerful for CSPs. Another great feature which FortiDDoS has is for blocking large reflection attacks. We have a feature called distress ACL, which is done at very high rate, all the way up to 280 Gbps on our 2000E appliance. And there you can block attack to a specific server. And if the source port is 53, you can do it when you are under distress and you want to block only the DNS traffic. It is quite possible that the attack is coming to your web server, for example, and there is no reason for those packets to reach your server. And therefore, you can just simply block them in your network and they would not reach the server. So this is another great feature for blocking large reflection attacks, which are totally unwanted attacks. Now, these features which I talked about, the TTL table, the DQRM table, LQ table, and cache table, they do have a limit on sizes, but uh, these are uh, programmed for very high occupancy. For example, the TTL table is 1.5 million entry per TP. So if you have a 2000E appliance with 6 TPs, totally you would have 9 million uh, deep table for TTL, which is extremely large and unprecedented in the industry. Similarly, the DQRM table is 1.9 million per TP. The LQ table is 128 per 128K per TP, and the cache table is 64K responses per TP. So these are uh, some factors that affect the performance of the TP2 and TP3s for DNS traffic, but they are over provisioned for most of our customers. So these will never become bottleneck for your network. More information about FortiDDoS is available on Fortinet.com site. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Bye bye.